Welcome to this edition of Great Books, a lively discussion of a selection from the canon of exceptional literature. Here's your host, Jack Hatfield.
Welcome. Hope you enjoy the show. I'm Jack Hatfield. To explain our selection, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Tonight we're going to be talking about Edmund Burke's reflection on the Revolution in France. Edmund Burke was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1729. His father was a lawyer whose ungovernable temper was much like his son. Burke was raised a Protestant, though his mother was a Catholic. Later, political enemies of Burke's in England insisted that he was Catholic and held this against him. Burke was educated at Trinity College in Dublin and studied law in London. He gave up law and began writing, although his father, furious, cut off Burke's allowance. Burke's first publication was The Vindication of Natural Society in 1756. Since it appeared anonymously and was written with the style of the late statement it discussed, the work was considered by some to have been written by the statesman himself and circulated after his death. After Burke's authorship was revealed, leading writers welcomed him into their circle. Burke began his political career in England in 1765. In that same year, he became a member of Parliament. Meanwhile, he wrote influential essays, letters, speeches, and statements advising British reconciliation with the American revolutionists, attacking and analyzing the French Revolution, discussing the corruptness of government in India, the oppression of Catholics in Ireland, and the responsibility of king, parliament, and political parties in England. Despite his success, Burke had constant money worries. He died in 1797, not long after the death of his only son.
I'd add that during this time, Europe was going through a lot of changes, and France was going through the Revolution, which was really looked upon by the English as a kind of a failed experiment. So anyway, what kind of government is Burke really espousing, and how should that government deal with change, needed change?
Carefully.
Thoughtfully. That's okay.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer to the first question, he really liked the idea of the monarchy being involved and not giving it up completely, along with people of property being in the House of Commons, if I could use that term, and then listening to the common people. I think it was a combination of those three things.
I think he was espousing a government that was much like England's.
England,
Oh, yes,
absolutely.
of course he was.
Of course.
Yeah.
That was supposed to
He
be
thought
the
that
model.
was pretty darn good, and that the French should have used it as a model. So, what is that called? A sort of a moderated monarchy.
A constitutional republic with a monarch.
with aristocracy. I'm not sure exactly how to characterize it.
How should it deal with change? Besides carefully, which is certainly his answer, but other than that, how does it?
It should take a long view and base things on tradition and look to see what the antecedents had done, as opposed to coming up with something totally new and untried. That any kind of theoretical good needs to be tried out over time before it's accepted. And so any change needs to be vetted pretty carefully.
Well, he wanted you to think of it as an entailed inheritance,
Right.
and that was supposed to govern how you changed it, the same way that a trustee would handle an inheritance. So you're supposed to preserve it. At the same time, you're supposed to have some foresight, and you're supposed to be prudent. And those were his three principles, actually, for changing anything.
But a big believer in going into the past and not eliminating the past.
Well, the past is a treasure.
Pardon me?
That's how he
Past
saw
is
it.
a treasure.
Right.
Sort of the
It's the inheritance that
precipitative
has
wisdom.
to be
yeah.
preserved.
He must have
entailed.
mentioned that 20 times
Yes.
in the few pages that we read.
You know, one thing that I think it might be interesting to mention with Bob's introduction, before we go further, is that this was written in, I think, 1790, before the Terror.
Before the terror.
Yes.
Before
and
the
king and
Terror,
queen
and
were
so
still
he's
alive,
somewhat
too.
prescient. And as we'll see, some of the things that he warns us against.
At some point he says that that the assembly is about a year old, that
Yes,
the National Assembly,
yes.
and so that was well before the terror,
1790,
actually.
91.
Yeah.
Right.
He had no faith in the assembly at all. He called them all lawyers. So that
Lawyers.
wasn't
Yes,
that
yes.
But that was,
like it was very bad to be a lawyer.
well, he tells us why
Prefigured
he doesn't
Dickens.
like, because he has a lot of faith in jurisprudence.
because they didn't believe in the old laws, and they got rid of the king. I mean, that was part of it.
Right.
Well, they were
Again-
stupid, is what he was really saying. They did not understand their heritage. And, you know, and so they were just going on the basis of what constituted them as a national assembly. You know, they got rid of the 3 estates, somewhere it says that in a footnote.
Right.
Yeah.
Put them all together and put the dumbest people in charge, or at least they had the majority,
Right.
from his view, of course.
Yeah,
the
from
dumbest
his
people.
view.
Well, he was
Getting
right,
back to
probably, too.
getting back to I was looking for this line. It doesn't fully answer your question, but it certainly gives some idea of what he thinks about. He says thus he talks about how you do change a commonwealth that's well governed. He says thus by preserving the method of nature in the conduct of the state, in what we improve we are never wholly new, in what we retain we are never wholly obsolete.
Yeah.
So it's not just carefully, but it's by this accrual that preserves what's good from the past and takes an increment of the proposal for change. But it's very incremental.
Wisely selects an increment.
Wisely selected.
Yeah, he wants prudence. I mean, you can pick a lot of things from the past that don't always work.
Right.
Respecting your forefathers would have allowed you to respect yourself. That's what he said.
Yeah.
In fact,
Your
in fact,
forefathers'
the very,
wisdom, not all of their actions.
in fact, the very next line after that is by adhering in this manner, we are guided not by the superstition of antiquarians who just basically want to preserve the past for no other reason than that it's the past, but by the spirit of philosophic analogy, which I think is the issue of nature that he
Sure.
continually brings up.
Well, he believes the essence of man is the spirit of liberty, but the problem is you want a rational spirit of liberty, and that's what's, well, actually, the social contract is where
He
it
talks about
starts.
that, too,
And
yeah.
the evolution of government is the evolution within the social contract.
He says liberty is corrosive.
Unbridled.
Unbridled
liberty
liberty,
is
exactly.
corrosive.
Why?
And that it has a tendency to be unbridled
Right.
unless it's contained.
Now, he's very much of an elitist, saying that the common people, which he doesn't have a very high opinion of, are dumb, to use Jake's term. And he's saying that the equivalent of the House of the nobility, the House of Lords sort of thing, and the monarchy are not. They're somehow, because they're rich, somehow that they're smart.
I can't believe-
How did he say that? Why?
Yeah, how he gave them so much credit for inheriting.
Yeah.
If you came
That's
from a
right.
family that was, had a reputation for 200 years, you were automatically bright.
Right.
I didn't get the
No,
sense that
he
he thought
didn't
they were
say that at
automatically
all.
bright, but I thought what I
Well,
did get the sense of was,
respected.
well, I thought it. I think it's a little unclear from this, but I got 2 things out of it. One was that underlying the sense of the importance of property was the fact that these people literally owned the state, in the sense that most of the property was in their hands. So they literally owned the state. But the other thing was, and I think it wasn't so much that they were so bright, but that the need to preserve the entailment from generation to generation, not squander it, increase it if you can, but certainly steward it, inculcated a set of mental and moral habits that fitted them for governance. That's how
Yes.
that's the sense I got.
I
Because he did say that in the House of Commons the majority of people had land.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he said we didn't plan it that way.
Right.
But that's in fact how it
I
happened.
think he acknowledges at some point that Louis XVI is a weak monarch.
Right.
And so there's wisdom in the institution of the monarchy and of tradition, or the entailment, or whatever. But any local case might be not optimal.
The person
but
himself.
over time, right, but over time, the institution has the wisdom of the ages that is worth preserving.
Well, the problem with Louis was that they gave too much power to people who didn't know how to use it. I mean, what he's saying is that people that have been in power will normally be good ones to use it, and as they screw up the stewardship of that power, they too are going to lose their power, and others are going to rise to take their place.
He didn't say that about the Americans, though.
What does it say in America?
Well, the reason why
anything about
he,
America.
I don't think he does.
no, I think the reason why he accepted America was because they tried to get to the king.
Is that anything in here?
No, it's not in
No, it's
there.
not. Let me read
I know
something.
what he did say about it.
I thought it- okay.
We procure reverence to our civil institutions on the principle upon which nature teaches us to revere individual man on account of their age and on account of those from whom they are descended. I'll go back to Bob's question again. His answer. I didn't quite understand, Joe. I understand what you said, but I don't understand how it applies. Why did people whose interests are to keep their property and keep their power, why are they better suited for government than other people?
Well, besides, again, this is my take. I'm not sure I can point to a specific passage, but that besides them having inculcated, besides the fact that having to preserve their property and seeing themselves as stewards of the property, having an obligation to a recognition that it came to them from the past, not because of their own efforts, and that their obligation was to pass it on to the future.
That's just being selfish, and it's one way of looking at it.
Well,
one way of looking at it,
pass
but-
it on
but the-
within your
but the point-
family. He's got the analogy of the family.
Right.
The
Right.
family is the fundamental unit of the social contract, and then he has kind of an analogy between government and how you should behave in a family.
He does make that.
That's where the
he does.
entailment
He does
comes.
make that.
It's
yeah,
critical,
He
'cause
does
that's
make
where you
that
get-
I
analogy.
think the
and that
experience too. I mean, he's the original conservative, and so he wants things to continue as they've been, as the ancestors have had it in their wisdom, but not in their foolishness. And so he wants things to continue so the people who have had the property will continue to have the property because they know how to govern, because they have been governing. Unlike the people that he points to, the pharmacists or
Hairdressers.
hairdressers,
The
people
hairdressers,
who are inexperienced in government, he says, have no basis for understanding what they need to do in the future, and so they'll make it up afresh. Whereas the people who have done it know how it's been done.
Oh,
And I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think that there's another. He is an evolutionist, but I think that gets to another issue having to do with your
He
question.
thinks that the people that have property have earned it, and there's a proportion
They didn't earn it. All they
between
did-
ability and skill. Yes, it's passed down entailed.
Right, he
But
just
the
inherited
original
it.
people earned it to pass down to their kids.
Well, that doesn't count
And-
as-
And he also says that if you don't handle it right, you're going to lose it, and other people are going to get it.
And hairdressers won't handle it right.
That's it. Hairdressers won't handle it right. I mean, I think that the other piece is that.
What is it
he's-
about the acquisition of property that makes you bright?
It doesn't make you
It's
bright.
not bright. I don't think.
Makes you.
It-
any-
it-
It just
Better
makes you
able to
more.
govern.
It just makes you fitter to govern.
Well, you're
we
concerned
tend
about your
to
property.
we tend to equate intelligence with ability.
So, in today's world, if I may, those who have all the money, okay, and buy themselves an election are fit
Yes.
to represent us because
I
they
don't know.
have-
I don't know if Burke would say
What's the
that.
difference
I don't
between
know if
money
Burke
and
would say
land?
Well,
that.
must be
there's
right.
quite a
There's a
bit of
Supreme
difference.
Court ruling.
There's a difference?
I remember this.
He
this
says
quote.
property is the basis of the social contract, is what he's saying.
The other
And
thing
it's
is,
the
I think,
basis of government.
I think he thinks that the hairdressers. He talks about liberty as being a wild gas. Remember that
Yeah,
expression?
right.
You know, you loosen it, and it goes
You
like
have
all
to
over.
discipline the spirit
And-
of liberty.
Right, and that's it. That he was pointing to what happened in the National Assembly, and what happened when this group got together, which was supposed to have a relatively limited, a quite limited. Portfolio. In fact, they let loose all sorts of stuff. You're right, he doesn't have a very high opinion of people's ability to resist the temptations of unlimited freedom. Where the landed people come in is not because they're bright, not because they necessarily are wiser. They do, but in part, I think he does think, as David was saying, that they have these, that they know how to shepherd stuff because they've been doing it all their lives, but also because they have more to lose. So they are going to function as a brake on the system. So the idea is that if you it's checks and balances.
Provides
That
stability,
the people who are the landed people are the checks and balances of the National Assembly. I mean, that's kind of that's what he sees as the alternative, is the National Assembly, which has no checks and balances. They answer to nobody.
But the history of England, which is the model underlying this, is an increase in the gradations of land. There's more distribution of property. You still have the great landed estates and so on, but more and more is there.
More and more is.
More and more people at the lower end also have property.
Yeah, he sort of alluded to that at one point.
And that's
yeah.
part of what provides for stability. If everybody has a share of property, that's why you have the social compact. So your property that you do have is protected. That's what he says. That's not what.
Right. No, I think
See,
right, I agree.
I think that he's placing an emphasis someplace else on just the pure fact of inheriting. I mean, he says by this means our Constitution preserves. Well, let me say, we have an inheritable crown. He's talking about England, an inheritable peerage, a House of Commons, and a people inheriting privileges, franchises, and liberties from a long line of ancestors. He places that on a pedestal, that the inheritance, not the ability to govern, their inheritance, is just the fact of their inheriting. That reminds me of I forgot who it was, the guy, Michael, what's his name, Oakbrook. Someone that once
Butler. That's
Oh,
Oakbrook.
Butler, yeah.
Butler.
said you're worth $5 million. How'd you get there? And he says, well, I inherited $10 million.
You got a 50%
So he lost it.
I forgot that.
I hadn't heard that one.
He really doesn't say that. He thinks the social contract is an organic thing. It's a compact of families, and you preserve family skills as a kind of a heritage, and as they work together. That's why he spends all his time tracing things down from the Magna Carta to the Declaration of Rights in 1689 to show how things have evolved. But he wants slow evolution. I mean, he doesn't want rapid change because he thinks it hurts the people it's supposed to help as much as it does anything.
Yeah. He says that.
Yeah, he does
Yeah,
say that.
He does.
Yeah,
There was a line, I'm going to read it, if I can read my notes. France has not sacrificed her virtues to her interest, but has abandoned her interest that she might prostitute her virtues. Explain that to me. You remember the line?
I remember it, and that was one of the ones I didn't understand.
That was
one of the ones I didn't
put down
understand.
question mark. Anybody have any?
But it's symmetrical,
Well,
so it
sure.
must be profound.
There was loyalty. The common people were good Catholics, and by and large, loyalty to religion, loyalty to their parish priests. They got along with each other. The problem was that
What were their interests?
their interests were getting fed and raising their children and making sure they had the advantages which they perceived fitted their station.
But he said they prostituted their virtue.
Well, that's what the assembly did. He's talking about the assembly. He's talking about these people coming together and seizing power.
They threw away
they-
their heritage.
They had the Estates General, which was supposed to be balanced, and made this National Assembly, which is controlled by what he considered to be rabble. And in a
rabble.
certain sense, they were. He spends a whole lot of time here analyzing why these people are not equipped to govern.
Yes, he does
He
do that.
says some of these guys are kind of smart, but and then he also says nobody should be judge of their own
Yeah.
case.
Yeah.
And I mean, he
But
just.
he doesn't turn that lens upon the two other parts of the government, which is the nobility and the other. He's saying all these people are just stupid and can't govern, but he never looks really at
Well, he says
fragility.
over the long course of time, these people have contributed to the inheritance that is the national treasure.
Yeah,
These
see, he doesn't have to, though, because he doesn't have to look at the nobility. He doesn't have
Right,
to look
I
at
know.
because his view, as I think it was you, Dave, said it was, or somebody said it was evolutionary. Maybe it was you, Jake.
So-
In a way, you can look at this as a sort of a Darwinian model of applied to culture. I mean, the English system has worked And it's been formed by trial and error over years,
And
and slowly, just like
Where is it today?
well,
It's pretty far
it's
away.
about ready to split apart. Actually,
that's
if
different.
we have that,
Scotland is
if
kissing
they had that
Rome.
vote, yeah.
Soon
goodbye.
after this, they had
Yeah.
a real
Yeah, but this is
change in government.
1800s,
So,
and
yeah,
right.
so
they've lost their empire.
But his view, but that's why he wouldn't have to look at it. I mean, he would only have to look at it in the way in which it contrasts with the French model, because he believes that the British model is preferable. I mean, I think at one point he says you shouldn't any system that has tolerably, which was an interesting word, any system that has tolerably met the needs, I have to find it, met the needs of people should not be overturned lightly. And he certainly thinks that, and he certainly thinks that the British system has not only tolerably met it, but has been an experimental government. It didn't come about because of like the French Revolution, which came about because philosophers and the philosophes, thought that, propounded ideas that were, et cetera, that it came from the top down. He thought that the British system really came from the bottom up. I mean, it was an experimental system. It's worked. It's gotten us where we are. There's no need to turn his view on that.
he's against revolution.
Well,
He's
here's
against
where he
this
talks about their
getting
political
change.
system.
He's against revolutionary change.
What does he say about if most political systems end up with people in power who are very resistant to change because the power that they've set up helps them? Does he really get into how people change against this established order?
I mean, how
yes,
change is
he talks
actually
about when you can
introduced,
have
or
happen.
how change should happen, or
Yeah.
how it does in fact happen, or
how do you go against entrenched order?
Well, you can be a revolution. He talks about in here about when there should be a revolution. When it's
very rarely by
right,
extreme
when
necessity.
it's forced on you
Right,
by
that's right.
necessity.
That's
you know?
right.
And he compares to, that's what's happened in
Disjointed
England.
incrementalism.
what's that?
Disjointed incrementalism.
Disjointed incrementalism.
Basically.
Yeah.
He doesn't. I don't.
Well,
Again,
that's
I
what
don't.
our
I don't think he actually looks at it with. He only looks. I mean, at least in this selection, maybe he does in the larger piece or other writings.
wouldn't
But
know
this
it
is a
then. I haven't read
polemical
it.
piece. I mean, this is really to point out what he sees as the bad directions that France is taking. In that respect, he doesn't have to really analyze the system in great detail, the British system. All he has to do is point out those elements of it which he thinks are superior to the French system, or where he thinks that.
But what he has to do is to say the French system. When he attacks it, he attacks a lot of different things within it that the English system is meeting. To do that, he's saying the common people are worthless, and he doesn't present, by implication, he's presenting an argument for having nobility.
saying
He
they're
keeps saying that the
worthless.
common people are worthless, and I don't really agree with that
doesn't
characterization.
say that at all.
Common people are worthless.
No, he's not for democracy. That's what Jack
at
is
least
talking about,
at least
democracy.
unfettered democracy. No, but
He's
what he
not
would
for
consider
democracy.
unfettered democracy. But
Yes,
I don't
he
agree
is.
with your
He's for
characterization, Jack,
democracy.
because I think that he thinks that the common people and what happens at that level may not necessarily be the brightest, apples in the bunch.
The most prepared.
Or the most prepared, or anything like that. But it's through the living of their daily life and the exigencies that happen in daily life and how that gets brought to the magistrates at a lower level, and how that. I mean, he sees it very organically, like the growth of a plant. And what he's saying is that the French, this metaphor, it seemed to me, continued throughout the whole thing, that the state is like a living, organic thing, whereas the French see it as a mechanism, as a mechanical thing where you can pull the pieces
that's why
apart
theory is
and
no
put it
good.
all back together again the way you want it. And he talked about the dismemberment of the father. Remember that? I mean, you remember that that you go in and you hack the father to pieces, and then what you do is you take those pieces and you throw them in a pot. With the magicians, he means the philosophers and the leaders of the French Revolution, and you hope that the father gets reconstituted.
Somebody else,
keeps-
we've got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think of all of this?
About his views on
Yeah.
the French Revolution.
Yeah.
Well, number one, it was a great read, I thought. A difficult
hard
read.
read,
Yeah,
I
it was
thought,
very
yeah.
difficult. I had to read it 3 or 4 times. But I think he comes up with some good points in relationship to holding on to some of the principles of the past and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I thought that was
And that's happened sometimes in modern times
absolutely.
because they didn't read Burke.
And yeah. And France,
relation?
the Revolution of France was a great example of that, and he's making that point.
Well, France had some good government, you know. Louis XIV was a strong king, but the 15th and 16th, those guys spent them into the kind of mess we're in now with our national economy, with the tremendous debt.
Didn't they have to, he said something about paper money? Did the revolution?
Oh, they had all
paper
kinds
money
of
or
Worthless
something?
script.
Worthless
They were
script.
And
just
the
way down, you know,
valuable minerals
two or
went
three-
back to
two
them.
or
The very
three
moment
guys-
back into the earth.
Well, two or
They're
three
not
guys
sticking
tried
around.
to do something about
I
it,
thought
and
it
they
was
just
really fun
overrode
to
them.
read because even though it was hard, you have to parse those sentences because there are so many relative clauses
Yeah.
Oh,
in there.
big
But
time.
it's
Yeah.
so elegant
Yeah,
when
it
you
was
finally
elegant.
unfold it. He was really great as an architect of sentences, I thought.
I found it very difficult. When I read it the second time, it was much, much clearer. And then I could
yeah,
appreciate
read it
the rhetorical
Yeah.
devices in the
When his friend asked him about his opinion of the French Revolution, he says, I want to wait until the liquor wears off.
Yeah.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, before,
I
yeah.
don't think he meant in the alcohol sense.
I thought that was a great
I
line.
didn't see that one. I didn't even remember that. I read it twice. I don't even remember
Yeah.
that one.
Well, we got just a few more minutes,
Yeah.
and it's,
Here, let me read this about the sense of mankind authorizes us to examine into the mode of acquiring new power, to criticize on the use that is made of it with less awe and reverence than is usually conceded to a settled and recognized authority. But if you have a settled and recognized authority, you have a good government, and that's all he wants. But he doesn't want revolution unless you really got a darn good reason, and he goes into a long discussion of when you should have a revolution. And it's got to be based on principles of what he calls cogent expediency. He was considered somewhat of a liberal in his day, I think.
He was a Whig.
yeah.
Yes, he was a Whig, but he was an old Whig. There were old Whigs and new Whigs after the.
Yeah, he formed it.
Anyway, any last thoughts? We've got a minute left.
My only last thought was I thought it was a great read the second time around, I wish we could have gotten into a little bit more into the thing that you proposed. That is, what work does the notion of nature do
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
in
yeah.
this thing for him? Because I think that would have been really interesting to kind of get
Nature
into.
and family go together.
Right.
But he's also saying that hereditary people that I read it as people that are rich, like now, they have a right to rule. There's a popular, very wealthy person, billionaire, who says billionaires should have more than one vote.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
Well, sometimes they should. I can think of some that
See?
shouldn't.
Anyway, we are.
On that note.
He thinks property is a preliminary qualification to be a good ruler.
We're finished.
Sorry to hear that. We didn't do justice to this book.
So, okay. So
This man
thank
was
you
a
out there.
great